Forget it. Okay. We're going to switch gears a little bit here. And this is something I did it last year, but it was kind of I don't want to say thrown together because that makes it seem like, I got up one day and just sort of did it on a napkin. But I talked about this last year, and a guy wanted me to do it again this year. And so I agreed. What we're going to talk about here is, let's just assume, for the sake of discussion, that the extraterrestrial as creator of humanity. Now, none of the literature I'm familiar with has ETs claiming to have created the universe. I don't know anybody that says that. But they do often want to position the extraterrestrial or whatever entity, whatever channeled message they receive. There's often this talk of how extraterrestrials created humanity. And so what we're going to do here is essentially say, okay, if this is true, if that's true, that we were actually created by extraterrestrials who are now essentially abducting people and experimenting on them, and if it's true that Zecharia Sitchin's views are correct, and of course you know that I don't think that. But again, if it is, if the Mesopotamian text actually describes some extraterrestrial race creating us, what would that mean? Okay, how would that work out in terms of a worldview? And is that something to get really enthused about? Okay, and we're going to go through and just sort of follow the logic. This session's not going to take that long, but we're going to follow the logic and compare the traditional theistic creator paradigm, whether you're a Muslim, Jew, or Christian doesn't matter, but just that there's a God, a personal God who creates, and sort of note the comparisons. And I'm going to suggest that this reveals the dark side of believing that the design of us, the design of our civilization at the hands of ETs is a dark thing. It's not a very optimistic thing. So, for the sake of the session, let's presume for a moment, if this teaching is indeed correct, we'll presume that humanity was created by ETs who came to Earth long ago. We'll presume that these ETs and their creation of humanity is described in ancient Mesopotamian texts, whose content is often mirrored in the Bible, and that these ETs are therefore the God or gods that humanity has become accustomed to thinking about. If the ET creator view is true, then where would that leave us? Is that something to celebrate or get enthused about? Should we, as they did in Independence Day, go up to the top of buildings? Oh, you're wonderful. You're finally back to bless us. Let me suggest several implications that logically extend from those assumptions. First, if this is true, then you, as a member of the human race, have no inherent dignity. This conclusion extends from the fact that if ETs are the gods of the ancient creation stories, then we were created as slaves by the Mesopotamian ET gods, the Anunnaki, because that's what the texts say. Okay? It's point blank what they say. This is Atrahasis, Tablet 1. When the gods instead of man did the work and bore the loads, the gods' load was too great, the work was too hard, the trouble too much. Right there, that should tell you that the conception of a god in Mesopotamia is quite different from the conception in the Israelite religion. God doesn't need a lunch break, or much less a slave race to do work. The great Anunnaki made the Igigi carry the workload sevenfold. Anu, their father, was king. Their counselor, warrior, Elil, their chamberlain was Ninurta, their canal controller, Anugi. They took the box of lots, cast the lots. The gods made the division. Anu went up to the sky, and Elil took the earth for his people. The bolt which bars the sea was assigned to far-sighted Anki, so on and so forth. The last line, the Anunnaki of the sky made the Igigi bear the workload. The gods, pity them, had to dig out canals, had to clear channels, the lifelines of the land, so on and so forth. For 3,600 years they bore the excess. Hard work, night and day. They groaned and blamed each other, grumbled over the masses of excavated soil. And then they decide, let us confront our chamberlain and get him to relieve us of our hard work. Come, let us carry the Lord. Let us carry the Lord, the counselor of the gods, the warrior from his dwelling. Let's go and grab him, take him out of his house. And made his voice heard and spoke to the gods, his brothers. Why are we blaming them? Their work was too hard. Their trouble was too much. I'm abbreviating this with the ellipses. They said, let's go get that God. And then they go and confront him, and then listens to their complaint and says, well, I guess we can't blame them. Their work was hard. Their trouble was too much. Every day the earth resounded. The warning signal was loud enough. We kept hearing the noise. There it is, and the text breaks off there. And so they go to the creatress. Belet Ili, the womb goddess, is present. Let her create a mortal man so that he may bear the yoke, the work of Elil. Let man bear the load of the gods. Nintu shall mix the clay with his flesh and blood. Then a god and a man will be mixed together in clay. They answered yes in the assembly, the great Anunnaki who assign the fates. Now, if this is the case, you are all owed reparations by the gods. I mean, that's essentially what you've got. You are a slave, your father was a slave, and so on and so forth, all the way. We're all slaves. In other words, we have no inherent dignity. We are the low end of the totem pole in a divinely ordained caste system. That's what we are. We are chattel, if this is true. Now, this divine image idea, which is biblical, aren't we created in the image of the gods? Again, it's a biblical theistic concept. It is not part of the Mesopotamian concept. If we go back here, let her create a mortal man so that he may bear the yoke, the work of Elil. Let men bear the load of the gods. Zecharia Sitchin tries to, and it's kind of amazing again, he tries to take these phrases, bear the yoke, bear the load, and he tries to argue that yoke, and load here actually refers to the image of God. Of course, the problem is that the biblical word for image is tselem, Akkadian is tsalmu, and that is not the word used in any of those three lines in that text. So contrary to what he says, this is not a creation that has the gods, the Anunnaki, creating humanity in their image. No, the text actually means what it says, that we were created, in their view, as slaves. We are strapped with their burden. Well, that's not what the alien who abducted me told me. Well, if you were told about how special you were, think again. Or abandon the Sitchin worldview, which you could do and still retain, an extraterrestrial worldview. 2 questions. How do you know his message, the ET, can be trusted? How do you know that? Doesn't he know what his ancient offspring wrote about him? Okay, again, we're presuming that this is true, that the extraterrestrial gods created us. Well, doesn't the ET who abducted you know what the ancient Mesopotamians wrote about him long ago when he supposedly created you? Did he forget that? The bottom line is that in the ET creator view, we were created as slaves, and our makers wanted it that way. In contrast, the theistic creator worldview has every man, woman, child, unborn, born, whatever, every person has inherent worth as God's imagers. Life is sacred because we are the receptacles of God's life and share certain of his attributes. Humans are Yahweh in effigy. That is, we are his representatives. We're not gods, but we are placed upon the earth, as I said before in another session. We are God's representatives. We are to rule and steward, to take care of the world, not to rape and pillage it. We are to take care of the world, steward it as though God were here. We aren't, as the Old Testament teaches, God's representatives on earth if the ET view is correct. Also, if it's correct, there's no higher purpose for your life, since there's no concept of eternal reward in a personal heaven from a personal loving God. That idea is completely foreign in Mesopotamia. You read any introduction